well, then they will increase retention next year. But there was no mention of whether or not river closure, right, would be removed next year. But they will increase retention if the stock responds well to what we're doing. There was the thing about this particular thing, there's lots of uncertainties, and he made point of that many times in my conversation yesterday. They're a little bit cautious. They want to take a cautious approach. They don't know how the stock will react to this particular announcement. We all know that the level of fishing activity has increased, right? Especially in May. I again went back to the idea of there's really no count on anglers. So we got to know basically two things. That's what one thing that they're looking for. They want to have an idea on how many people are fishing, and they want to have a better understanding of the level of stock. But they really don't have a plan per se, other than doing a survey and getting some more scientific equipment to really manage and get an idea of what stock we have in our river. My point is much like John's point, is the fact that I'm arguing that this river never had a closure before, and this stock has rebounded incredibly. And if anything, they should be bragging about it, because it's a pretty successful thing, and let's maybe take that same initiatives and let's put it to some other species, because I think we need it, right? And I'm not just talking, right, the salmon species, I'm talking all species, right, and that have coexist in our habitat, okay? Because whatever they did, obviously it worked, and maybe that's an answer for some of our other low numbers of stock. I did get him to send me a science paper that basically, I was after the idea, if they're going to say that this is the only spawning ground, I want scientific data that tells me that, right? I'm after data. I want to know where do you have that claim, right? Because when I make my students write me a research paper, when they put something on paper, they have to back it up with a reference, because I want to know where that reference is. And when those guys write a paper, they also have to put references. So if they're going to say that claim, I want to see the science and I want to read the document. And I don't think there's much documentation out there yet. And like John said, I don't think they did a lot of research other than back in 2012, where they explored some other areas to see whether or not bass is spawning. My answer, I also asked the question about successful spawn, because they always come back to the idea that fish may be spawning, right, but maybe it's not successful spawn. So I said, how do you define successful spawn? And his answer was, we want to see bass in that river that's about 1.5 inches long, right? 1.5 inches long. That's what they're looking for successful spawn when they go exploring different watersheds. At the end of the day, like I said, I went and basically left my last letter. I brought up the idea that predictions always don't turn out as they expect, right? Because they did that in 2006, saying we never meet the recovery, and look where we're at now. And I asked, the last question was basically, what's your goal here? I mean, what is the goal of this whole announcement? And they would basically come back to the point that they're looking at the entire Southern Gulf, right? Especially in the summer when born bass can be retained. So the summer season, they do expect more bass out of the system. But like Debbie said, I mean, that's not helping us Miramichiers much, because according to their report that was released in March, their highest bycatch was in May. By mid-June, in the Miramichi, there was low numbers of bass. So I don't think we're going to see too many bass coming home with us from June to August. But that's just one of my predictions. The other thing I kind of hit home, that wasn't in my letter, but I was, after talking words, I want to know some information about it, is I wanted to know about the striped bass's diet, and what are they eating and how are they studying that. And one of the big things that they came back to was the fact that when they did stomach analysis on 467 bass, which was their sample size, less than 3% of the smolts, less than 3% of the bass had smolts in them. So I said, I'm a little bit of a math teacher too, but when I take 3% of 300,000, that's still a pretty big number, right? And to me, this is a predator fish and it likes to eat. And what I experienced last Sunday night at the mill stream, that behavior, right, really didn't happen before on this river. But when you see teams of bass basically grouping up and going for a feeding frenzy, right, I don't think they're going to stop at a smelt or a smolt or whatever else is in front of them. Woo! So at the end of the day, I kind of left them with this quote. Now, anyone that knows me, I do like to talk a bit, but I don't want to hog the mic too much. And here's what I left with. It says, I'm just a concerned resident of the Miramichi who's passionate about the river I call home. A balanced ecosystem is a must for all species, and we as anglers and managers have an obligation to be stewards of our ecosystem. I never want to see Miramichi striped bass populations get to a point that we saw in the late 1990s. I truly enjoy sharing this recreation with my family and the youth of my community. However, without the necessary regulations in place to reduce this population, I'm worried about what other species may be a distant memory in a short time frame. Thanks for coming out, guys.